How are you feeling?
I get asked that a lot, and it's always very hard to answer because sometimes I feel like an invalid, like a newborn, and very fragile. And other times I feel like I could fly and I want to embrace everything, and I enjoy everything so intensely and savour it.
Talk me through sentencing. This kept getting kicked back after 3 months, yeah?
Yeah.
And then you were in court. What happened?
When the embassy guys told me the sentencing will be next week, my exact words were, "About bloody time." Handcuffed, shackled, feet shackled, into the court van, get to the court. So this was 7 a.m, so a boring wait until the 9:30 sentencing time, during which time I had to go to the toilet. And I'm, led down the corridor to go to a normal toilet, a sit-down toilet. And that was the first time I had sat on a toilet in over 3 years.
Wow.
And I relished the experience. I come out, there's a mirror. Again, the first time in over 3 years. With all the white hairs, I have just dyed my hair, by the way. And the dark eye pouches, I hadn't slept the night before, and wrinkles and whatnot. And looking really pale and frail, I felt.
So you get to the airport. Who's the first person you see? Is it Penny Wong or is it your kids?
It's my kids running at me, and my mum, who has aged a lot in the past 3 years. And we just all screamed, and my mum wept, and I just held on to her, and I could see that she had lost a lot of weight because of diabetes and having broken her ribs.
Yeah.
And just having to shoulder the burden mentally and physically, and just be strong for me all that time. My heart broke.
Okay, so you get to Melbourne.
Yeah.
What's the first meal you went out for in Melbourne?
Vietnamese.
Yeah?
Because my mum lives in a very Asian neighbourhood.
Yeah.
And we just walked to this little place and had pho, had chicken feet.
Wow. Chicken feet?
Well, they had Chinese food as well. Cantonese
that
food
would
as
not
well.
have been on my list for first meals.
Well, it was more because my kids and my mum as well. But then the next day, I gorged myself at the Vic Market, the temple of good eating.
Yeah.
And had bratwurst, had borek, then hot chocolate to wash it down, bought Moreton Bay bugs, Sydney rock oysters, and what else? What didn't I buy?
Lei only heard snippets of the campaign being waged on her behalf in Australia.
We're all dealing with the coronavirus crisis at the time. Her kids were bound in Melbourne and stuck and couldn't get them back.
Now that you ask, I remember, you asked what was the first meal you had.
Yeah.
More importantly, what was the first alcoholic drink you had?
Actually, very true. What was it?
It was Brown Brothers Patricia Champagne, and it was fantastic.
Oh, I love that. We will get you another bottle.
And I didn't get emo drunk at all.
That's impressive.
Slightly.
This is the question everyone wants to know.
Sure.
What were you actually accused of? And if I'll read out to you what was released by the Ministry of State Security after your sentencing.
Yep.
They said you were charged with illegally providing China state security secrets abroad, and that you illegally provided China state secrets that you had known at work through your mobile phone, and you were found to have been co-opted by an overseas institution. What did you do?
Well, you and I are both, I was in the business of telling people things. So you can imagine how much I have wanted to tell my story, because I know this is what everyone is curious about. But I'm also conscious of the fact, or I'm given to understand, that I can't really divulge details or specifics.
Okay.
And every country I guess different countries have different systems. One does what one has to do in that sort of situation. And my focus was getting home to my family in one piece.
I think I know, because we spoke yesterday.
Yes.
We kind of debriefed about your situation and what happened. I think that what you did was just a really minor thing, and you spent 3 years in a situation where you're deprived of information and you've been told that you did something wrong, and you kind of internalized that a little. Like, this is my opinion, and I worry that you actually hold guilt around something that you've done, which was incredibly basic. So they've said you shared a document. I mean, we're talking about a government briefing before you went on air, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and essentially you broke an embargo.
Yes.
By a few minutes.
Yes.
And that's the accusation against you.
Yes.
I mean, when I heard that, I gasped, because I've done that. I don't think there's a journalist alive who hasn't done that. Embargoes barely work in Australia because no one ever adheres to them, but it's a pretty normal part of media briefings. Do you actually feel like you did something wrong?
Well, the aim of RSDL and all the subsequent talks and writing self-assessments, I think, is to drive home that point, that in China that is a big sin.
Yeah.
That you have hurt the motherland, and that state's authority has been eroded because of you. And I mean, what seems innocuous to us here is, and I mean, I'm sure it's not limited to embargoes, but many other things are not in China. Especially, I'm given to understand that the gambit of state security is widening.
Yeah. So were you arrested? Did they just come in the night to your apartment? Was that how it happened?
No. They had people from my work, someone very senior, call me and say, "You're wanted here for a very important meeting about your new ambassador series."
Wow.
Yeah.
You work.
So
wow.
I went in thinking about work.
Yeah.
And I get to this big meeting room, and about 20 people there.
Yeah.
And then someone stands up, shows his badge, and says, "You're wanted for." And immediately they take my belongings away, and then I'm led to, or escorted to my apartment, where they'd already arranged with the security at my compound to go through the garage up to my apartment, where they looked for evidence all day.
Yeah. So when did you realise you were really in serious trouble?
They tried to give me hints at the apartment as we were leaving. They said, "Turn off the power and water, take some clothes, and take some toiletries." And I said, "Oh, it'll be right. I've left my apartment for a few weeks and no problems."
Yeah. Oh boy.
And they said, "You sure you don't want something to eat?" So I made myself a homemade bread toasted sandwich with cheese and avocado. And those three things I ended up not having for over 3 years.
Oh wow. And you had no idea that was your last free meal?
No. Or if I'd known, I would have had more.
Lei would go from her job as a global news anchor to 6 months of what's called residential detention.
It's to make you feel isolated and bored and pained and desperate. My experience was the first 5 months I got to read books, and I had a pen and paper with which to write, and that was much less painful than the final month of just 12 hours a day of pure sitting and very little chance to get up and just walk, just pace around a very little room.
Because you weren't allowed outside in that time at all.
No way.
So 5 months without seeing...
6 months in total.
6 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they say that they gave me 15 minutes of fresh air, but all it meant was there's a window up the top that the guard would open for 15 minutes, but the curtains are still drawn while the windows are open. And I certainly didn't feel that was fresh air.
Yeah.
And you never saw anything except the blue curtains and the mottled carpet and the beige padded walls.
And it was just silence.
Silence, yeah.
What were the nightmares? Can you describe them for me?
Every dream was a nightmare, because waking up, if it was a good dream, waking up was worse. And if it was a bad dream, then obviously you were frightened. So I had recurring dreams about my children with me on the bus, who were still little, and there was no car seat, and I couldn't help them when there was an accident. I had dreams about trying to reach Nick on the phone, and the phone would be taken away, or I would scroll and I couldn't find his name, or I'd ring and he wouldn't be there. Or I'd dream that I was outside and waking up to see the guards' faces was the worst. So when you were either trying to sleep and trying to block all those thoughts that you didn't want to go near in your head, and then when you slept, it was worse. Yeah. So I would translate poems in my head, or try to think of questions to ask. You know, why do things work a certain way? I would try to have internal conversations with Nick. You know, what would Nick say? How would he make this into a joke?
Yeah.
I even made up a radio station called Coffin FM. That's what it felt like. We were buried alive, and I would be sending or pretending to be different people and sending each other love song dedications. Yeah, I listened to a lot of I used to listen to a lot of radio. Yeah, and I still miss it very much.
Yeah, well, you got it back now.
Yeah. And one of the first songs I heard in the car on the radio was Boys of Summer.
Yeah.
And I told Nick, if there was a nuclear holocaust, there'd still be some Australian radio station playing Boys of Summer. And
that is a fact, yeah.